Hello, I'm Janice Rosinski, Director of the DEA Museum, and we're happy that you're here with us today. Today, we present a panel discussion entitled American Crisis, Fentanyl and Fake Pills. We're honored today to have three top subject matter experts. These are DEA's Chief of Operations, Raymond Donovan, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Special Operations Division, Donald M., and DEA Senior Forensic Chemist Emily Lockhart. They'll help us to understand where the crisis came from, what the science and business of fentanyl is, and what we can do to help solve the crisis. Also in this program, the DEA Museum staff will take you behind the scenes into the collection, where together we're going to see some artifacts that have never been seen before, and we'll learn about the history of pills. At the end of the program, we have made time for questions, so please email yours to deamuseum@dea.gov, and we'll make as much time as possible to answer those. Thank you again for joining us. And now to our moderator, Josh Edmondson, our Curator of Education. Josh?
Thanks, Jan. Criminal drug networks are mass producing fake pills and marketing them as legitimate prescription pills to deceive the American public. These pills are laced with fentanyl, an incredibly powerful synthetic opioid that is as much as 100 times more powerful than morphine. If these facts are not alarming enough, amazingly, DEA seized enough fentanyl in 2021 to kill every American. Because of these facts, as well as the staggering 100,000 plus overdose deaths over the last year in the United States, DEA launched the One Pill Can Kill campaign. There will be more information on the campaign later in the program. If for any reason you cannot watch the whole program today, it will be going up on our website permanently at deamuseum.org in the near future. Before we start our panel discussion and introduce you to our guests, let's watch the video our museum staff has created called Pills, Then and Now.
Welcome to the DEA Museum's Collections Facility. I'm Casey, the museum's historian, and I'm here to share some of the vast history that's packed into one of these, a pill. Pills are solid masses of medicine or other ingredients like vitamins. They're small and rounded so that people can swallow them whole. There are several different kinds of pills, like this tablet, and they come in different shapes, sizes, and colors. You probably have some in your medicine cabinet. Did you know that people thousands of years ago used pills to treat pains and illnesses? Ancient Egyptian writings describe medicines rolled into small shapes with bread dough. People in ancient Greece and Rome made similar remedies by hand. Techniques varied from place to place, but the general idea was to combine active ingredients with substances to hold them together so the entire mass could be swallowed. Pliny the Elder, a Roman scholar, called such masses pilulae, or little balls, in his work Natural History. Romans used bronze spatulas and other tools to make pills, including the first pill machine, a stone tablet with grooves that helped people roll and cut ingredients into small balls. Over time, people around the world adapted this knowledge and technology to create their own pills. In the late 19th century, a popular book instructed pharmacists on different pill-making techniques and tools, called The Art of Dispensing. It included chapters on the best and worst ingredients to hold pills together or make them easier to swallow. For example, a mixture of powdered licorice and soap was particularly good at holding together pills that contained essential oils. There's even a section on coating pills in chocolate, a process that was simpler than gilding pills in precious metals, a technique that was losing popularity because the metallic balls could pass right through someone's body without being digested. The text also explained how to use several tools and machines to produce pills and compressed tablets. A new and improved pill machine resembling its Roman predecessor was most commonly used at the time. Pharmacists would grind and combine their ingredients with a mortar and pestle before transferring the pasty dough onto the machine's flat board. They would then roll the dough into a long strip and roll that strip over metal grooves. The grooves shaped and cut the pills, depositing them into a convenient removable tray. If a pharmacist wanted to compress powder into tablets, they could operate a compressor or tablet machine. These machines pressed powder into dyes using a hand crank mechanism. The dyes were sharp and could be molded to make all kinds of shapes. While the goal was to create uniform pills of the same shape and size, two pills were rarely exactly alike. It also took time for people to make pills by hand. Inventors and medical professionals sought new, improved ways to mass-produce pills. One of the earliest industry-changing inventions was the rotary press, designed by Henry Bower in 1872. Bower was an employee of John Wyeth and Brother Incorporated, a company that used his machine to manufacture uniform, professional-looking pills. By 1891, the Philadelphia-based manufacturer was producing 1 million tablets a day. Over time, the rotary press and similar inventions were transformed into more intricate machines that increasingly automated and sped up the pill-making process. Now pills are plentiful, and it's quick and simple to buy over-the-counter medications from a store or fill a prescription at a pharmacy. While convenient and life-saving, sometimes people use these efficient technologies to make dangerous counterfeit pills or illegal drugs. Several objects in the DEA Museum's collection speak to this history and the challenges that people face today to keep their communities safe and healthy. Our museum technician, Emma, will share some of those artifacts with you and shed more light on the small but influential pill.
Hi, I'm Emma, and behind me is a variety of different pill bottles. Some are over 100 years old, but they all have one thing in common. Each was manufactured when new methods and technologies made it easier to produce uniform pills and tablets. The earliest bottles date back to about 1910 and were distributed by some of the most influential pharmaceutical manufacturers in the United States at the time. For example, this bottle of Fraser tablets was assembled in New York by the Fraser Tablet Company. The company's president, Horatio Fraser, was a pharmacist whose business achieved widespread success when it manufactured tablet triturates, or small tablets molded together with fine moistened powder. The Fraser Tablet Company and its competitors also used new inventions to make and distribute more pills than they ever had before. Machines like Henry Bower's rotary press increased the availability of manufactured pills across the country and around the world. By the mid-20th century, it was common for Americans to purchase ready-made pills from drugstores and other businesses. But these weren't the only places that supplied pills. Patients could also get them from their doctors, even in their homes. House calls were still common in the early to mid-20th century. Doctors carried bags, like this one, with their tools and treatments packed inside. The doctor who carried this bag kept vials of morphine pills in one of its compartments to treat pain. Morphine is derived from opium, a narcotic that comes from poppy plants. It dulls the senses and relieves pain, but is also highly addictive. Morphine is categorized as a Schedule II drug under the Controlled Substances Act, which Congress passed in 1970. The drug is currently accepted as a medical treatment, but its misuse may lead to severe psychological or physical dependence. Laws like the Controlled Substances Act make it illegal for unregistered manufacturers, medical practitioners, and other members of the public to make and sell scheduled drugs. However, some people use tablet presses like this one or similar machines to produce illegal drugs that are addictive and even deadly. A red motor powers this machine, which compresses powder into tablets. Sometimes people make pills using ingredients you would never expect and don't want to consume, like cleaning products and cosmetics. Today, criminal drug networks are mass-producing fake pills that look like real medicine, but are laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is 100 times more potent than morphine. Fentanyl can be deadly, even in doses as small as 10 to 20 grains of salt. DEA's laboratory analysis has shown that 4 out of every 10 fake pills with fentanyl contain a potentially lethal dose. To educate the public on the dangers of counterfeit pills, DEA has launched the One Pill Can Kill campaign. For more information, visit dea.gov/onepill and listen to today's panel of experts as they explore the significant development in the history of pill making.
Thanks, Casey and Emma. We hope you all enjoyed that interesting and informative video. We are so pleased to have this impressive panel with us today to talk about the American crisis of fentanyl and fake pills. I present to you Emily, Ray, and Don. Let's begin with some background on our topic. What led to this crisis? What is the historical perspective? Ray, would you like to begin?
Right. So what led to the fentanyl crisis was a multitude of reasons or issues that came about in the late 90s and early 2000s. The first thing is that big pharmaceutical companies were overproducing opioids. Doctors and pharmacists were overprescribing opioids. It really fueled the abuse and misuse of opioids late 90s, early 2000s. But at the same time, we saw the cocaine market that was being produced by Colombian cartels go from a primarily US market to a global market. So it left the Mexican cartels with marijuana and primarily heroin, black tar heroin and brown heroin as their illicit drugs to then smuggle into the United States, as well as globalization. So we saw technology advancements, encryption. We saw cryptocurrency, dark webs take a hold across the globe. And that really led to the interconnectivity through business, but also illicit business. So criminal groups really started to connect globally behind the drug trade. And then meth production. And so in the late 80s, we saw the super labs of methamphetamine. But behind that were organized crime groups from China. Now, we had them working alongside Mexican cartels, bringing in tons of precursor chemicals, but allowed them to really take a foothold in Mexico for the illicit chemical trade going into Mexico. And that was the first time we saw synthetics really take a hold in the United States at that level, which is also one of the reasons why fentanyl became a drug of choice here in the United States. And then finally, we noticed that the Mexican cartels wanted to make their heroin a lot stronger. So they started lacing their heroin with fentanyl to create a lot more of an addiction, to be honest with you. In 2006, we identified the first fentanyl lab in Toluca, Mexico. We realized that there was a cluster of overdose deaths in Chicago and in Detroit. And we were able to quickly get back and identify that laboratory in Mexico and take that down. But between 2006 and 2011, 2012, in that time frame, we didn't really see that much fentanyl trafficking in the United States. Around that time frame in 2011 and 12, we started noticing that precursor chemicals were coming into the United States from China. They were being shipped into the United States from express mail service providers into San Diego, Calexico, into the southwest border by Arizona. And then the precursor chemicals were smuggled into Mexico and then converted into fentanyl and then smuggled back into the United States as it was mixed with heroin. That was around 2012. In 2013, we in the DEA put out a national alert, the first national alert on the dangers of fentanyl and what we were noticing across the United States with the fentanyl increase, the trafficking taking place. And then from there, we've seen the change. Early on, as I mentioned, Mexican cartels were utilizing fentanyl to make their heroin stronger. Well, it started changing more and more from 2012 till now. Early on, 2014, 2015, we started seeing pure fentanyl getting smuggled into the United States. So organizations and the demand was looking for pure fentanyl to come in and not so much heroin. Although we were still seizing heroin, we started seeing a shift between more and more fentanyl and not as much heroin up until about 2020 when we saw that line be around the same. And so around the last 4 or 5 years is when we started seeing fentanyl pills really being pressed in Mexico and really as a matter of mass production in Mexico and then smuggled across the border. So fentanyl has taken a hold here in the United States. There are two primary drugs. It's fentanyl and methamphetamine that are the markets here in the U.S. And that's more or less the historical perspective.
Thank you so much. Don, how is it that these fake pills have gotten to people everywhere across the United States?
Well, it's a combination of factors, mainly through the use of the internet and technology. In many ways, the COVID lockdowns and the restrictions allowed technology companies and even criminal organizations to find innovative ways. And of course, because of the lockdown and these restrictions, um, everything people started to purchase, not at the physical store, but online, allowed other innovative ideas such as e-commerce activities where anyone can buy a product, groceries online and have it delivered. So therein lies that aspect where these criminal organizations, whether in Mexico or Canada or United States, and these cells were now realizing that and taking advantage of such and piggybacking on these type of technologies, using social media, using e-commerce, and even the overnight mail express carriers to have these pills and other types of drugs delivered online and in a secure, safe manner.
Thank you. Ray, can you tell us a little bit more about why are they pills now instead of powder?
That's a great question, Josh. So the most obvious reason is it's cheaper, it's more lucrative, it's more powerful, it's certainly more deadly. And then with the demand of opioids increased in the United States, it was the demand and the supply connection, right? Ultimately, what it came down to is the business model for Mexican cartel. So 1 kilo of fentanyl ranged between $3,000 to $10,000 from China at the height of when pure fentanyl was coming in from China. So what did that mean for a Mexican cartel? Well, it means that you didn't have to spend the overhead, the time and energy that it took to plant acres of poppies and then cultivate and then turn that poppy into heroin paste and then refine that. That's about a 4-month process. And so now with fentanyl coming directly from China for as little as $3,000, you're saving overhead costs, and then you're generating millions of dollars on the end. And it's an endless supply of chemicals, right? So it's not just, okay, you have people in the field cultivating heroin. No, you have laboratory. You could do that all year round. It's not dependent on the weather. It could take place indoors. So there's a multitude of reasons of why fentanyl took a hold, but ultimately it's because of the money.
Wow, thank you. I'm going to ask each of you to give us your own perspective on this next question. In your opinion, what is at the root of this crisis? Don, would you like to start?
Well, I wouldn't say there is just one root of this crisis that's taking place right now. It's a combination of factors. In many ways, this has become a perfect storm. A perfect storm where technology, a country where in China there's a massive globalization taking place with limited regulation and oversight and accountability, an existing opioid addiction that's already taking place due to pharmaceutical drugs. So if you take all those combinations and
I'm sorry, Don, we lost you for a second there.
yeah, so you've already had a population that had already been addicted to opioids from pharmaceutical drugs. Once that restriction started to increase in terms of availability, they started moving into the black market. Well, with the advent of the internet and social media, that allowed the black marketeers and those predators in Mexico and others throughout the world, including the United States, of course, to find these drugs, to identify all these types of new drugs and have it marketed all throughout social media. So you've taken that baseline addicted population, introduced black market drugs, where now the cartels started to realize that there was a huge demand for these types of pills. So all they did was just rebrand their heroin into semi-heroin, into fentanyl, and then all of a sudden to fentanyl. And that's why now we're seeing so-called M30 pills that are counterfeited to look like the real M30 oxycodone pills. Okay, and then you introduce social media, you introduce e-commerce, overnight mail deliveries. You've got all kinds of technologies such as payment apps. You have food delivery services. So all these variables come together, and in many ways expanded this whole crisis that's taken place. And of course, those lockdowns where all of a sudden, you had these adolescents and individuals that were remote and isolated, going through depression and anxiety, looking for some type of an escape. And therein lies that access to these social media apps where they were marketing all these types of pills. And whether it's a real Xanax or real Adderall or a Percocet, the cartels took advantage of such. And that's why they started to counterfeit these pills and sell it online.
Wow. Emily, what would you like to say about this? I know you have a special perspective.
Well, as Ray mentioned, the opioid crisis isn't a new phenomenon. It's something that has been festering in our country for decades. I grew up in Appalachia, which is an area in the United States frequently stereotyped for its poverty and drug abuse. My dad owns a small independent pharmacy there, and my mom was a nurse in my hometown. And I recall particularly when I was in middle school that my dad would be called out during the night because somebody was trying to break into the pharmacy and attempt to steal prescription drugs. And my mom would mention patients when she came home from work that were battling addiction, some of which were my age at the time. And that's just what was happening in my hometown, a really tiny community. But from the larger perspective, the Mexican DTOs are just adapting to the current market. There was a time when these DTOs primarily produced marijuana and black tar heroin, as Ray mentioned. And this type of heroin was primarily used west of the Mississippi. And so there was this whole untapped market east of the Mississippi that was being filled with white powder heroin from South America. And alluding to the globalization that we've talked about a little bit, there was some knowledge exchange between the South Americans and the Mexicans, and then the Mexicans began producing white powder heroin as well. And now they have a monopoly on the heroin market here in the United States. Some consumers don't want the stigma associated with injectable drugs or prefer the perceived safety of consuming a pharmaceutical drug. And so again, Mexican DTOs are businesses. They saw this hole in the market that they could potentially fill. And so this led to where we are today with counterfeit pharmaceutical tablets containing fentanyl. And from a chemistry perspective, the Mexican DTOs already have significant chemical know-how in their ranks. They're producing metric tons of methamphetamine each year. They have classically trained chemists and already have all of the infrastructure like the glassware and the access to precursor chemicals from their production of methamphetamine. So it was very easy for them to transition to producing fentanyl with only minor interruption.
Wow, thank you. And Ray?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The first thing is Mexican cartels are about power, control, and in particular, the control of the routes into the United States. So all they want is to generate as much revenue as possible. So when you look at synthetics, whether it's methamphetamine or fentanyl in this case, if you take one fentanyl pill, 1 kilo of fentanyl, it could generate in a lab 500,000 pills at 2 milligrams. So 500,000 pills across America, if it's sold at as much as $30 a pill, can generate millions of dollars. And so for a cartel, it's about money. And so 1 kilo could generate millions of dollars compared to 2 kilos of heroin or just 1 kilo of heroin, maybe $300,000 by the time it's stepped on and all the way down to the street level. So the business model in and of itself is one of the primary ways or purposes behind the cartels and pushing synthetics into the United States, is because it makes so much more money, right? The other issue I would address is exactly what Emily said, that the stigma that it was attached with intravenous drug use or illicit street use of hardcore heroin and other substances. It's not there necessarily with pills, because we all grow up, whether it's taking vitamins or taking some other prescription, when you get sick, the stigma is not there. So that more people are willing to try pills, not knowing the true inherent danger that's behind it. So it's more accessible, right? And it's more acceptable. And that's the difference between what we're seeing now as far as this crisis that we're dealing with. You know, there's three primary users that we see. One is a hardcore street user. They know exactly what they're getting. They know that it's fentanyl. They'll call it things such as China White on the street. And that's what they're looking for. Then you'll see the individual that is a diverted pharmaceutical user, who for whatever reason can't get access to the M30s or the oxys and will go towards the pill. Finally, we're seeing a group of people, primarily young adults, that are taking fentanyl, not knowing what it is. They think it's Xanax or Percocet or Adderall or some other drug. And so that's the danger that's behind fentanyl, because these pills are made to look exactly like they came out of a laboratory, or look exactly like a pill that someone was used to taking growing up. And so that's the inherent danger that we're faced with right now across America.
Thank you so much. Emily, this next question is special for you. How does science and intelligence help identify the crisis?
Well, of course, science is a very important part in understanding and managing the crisis. Forensic chemists like myself work to identify what substances are present in seized drug samples seized around the United States. And state and local forensic drug laboratories work diligently to identify the contents of those samples and serve as a great source of information for trends in specific geographic regions. They can even provide public health notifications when new drugs are identified or particularly potent material is submitted to the laboratory. At the Special Testing and Research Laboratory, where I work in the fentanyl profiling program, we take a more in-depth look at the samples submitted to our laboratory. In addition to identifying what controlled substances or drugs are present, we also identify the adulterants and diluents that are present in the sample, so all of the other components, that are present in the sample, and quantitate everything that we can. We not only want to know what's in there, but we want to know how much is present. Because fentanyl is a synthetic drug, it doesn't come from a plant, we're not able to geosource where the fentanyl is coming from. But we are able to determine what synthetic route was used to make it. And this gives us information on what precursor chemicals are used in the process. And that data is used to determine what chemicals need to be regulated and aids in tracking large shipments of precursor chemicals. I've prepared a slide I think they're going to display for you showing the purity of recent fentanyl samples. I do have both powder and tablet samples displayed in here. So you'll see for the powder samples, we've had a steady increase in purity since 2017. It's quite unsettling to see, how steep the increase has been. For tablets, we're pretty consistent for 2021 samples with what we saw in 2020, but we have seen over time an increase in the amount of fentanyl per tablet. And as was mentioned, we're right around an average of 2 milligrams per tablet in samples submitted to the fentanyl profiling program.
Thank you so much, Emily. Don, I'm going to pose this next question to you. How are the fake pills entering the U.S.?
Well, they're entering the United States in various manners of which you can imagine, through air cargo, through maritime, through smuggling on their tunnels across the border, whether it's coming in by human carriers or by vehicles, smuggled in vehicles, hidden compartments, you name it. They're coming in every manner which you could imagine. Air parcel carriers, also shipping containers. So it comes into the United States. Once it's in the United States, it gets sent to certain distribution centers, predominantly, of course, along the southwest border, and then all of a sudden, it's either mailed or delivered via vehicles through the various populated centers, such as the Northeast United States. And then from there, it's distributed throughout certain cells and distribution networks and organizations who then either sell it on the streets or they sell it by marketing on social media, and they mail it to individuals.
Ray, can you speak to the industrialization or how industrialization has exponentially increased the drugs in the United States?
Sure. So it goes really back to the super laboratories, the meth laboratories that were in Mexico in the late 80s into the 90s, when we first saw meth being mass produced in Mexico for U.S. markets. And we identified Asian gangs, Chinese gangs, collaborating with Mexican cartels to bring in precursor chemicals towards that production. And so since then, these gangs are now partnered up with the Mexican cartels in regards to fentanyl. And so we see these same organizations well established in major cartel cities in Mexico that work hand in hand with them to bring in the necessary components to produce fentanyl right now. So it really started going back in the 80s when these groups connected and started collaborating, and then it's all the way up till today. And so we see that on the front end, and on the back end, we see millions of dollars going into Mexico from these same organizations. And so that's where it came from. But I wanted to elaborate on something Don said about how the drugs are smuggled into the country. So one of the primary means for drugs coming into the United States are through the POEs, through the ports of entries. And when you have thousands of vehicles going back and forth each and every day, the cartels built into their business plan the fact that they're going to lose a certain amount of drugs that are being hidden in compartments in trucks and in vehicles each and every day. It's understood that they're going to lose that. But because they're making so much money, they continue to go through that, through the POEs in the hidden compartments. But as Don also said, there's other methods that they will deploy, whether it's tunnels, whether it's drones. We've seen drones used as well along the southwest border. Shipping is another, express mail into the United States is another primary means. You know, before China instituted regulations on fentanyl production in May of 2019, we used to see a lot more fentanyl go directly into our international airports from China. Well, that changed after May of 2019. We see a lot more of the precursor chemicals going into Mexico, then produced into fentanyl, then turned into pills, and then smuggled across the border.
Thank you. Emily, would you like to talk about the percentage of meth that's responsible for overdose deaths today? I think that's, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Sure. So there has been an increase in methamphetamine overdoses lately. A National Institute of Health study published in JAMA Psychiatry last year reported that the number of people reporting methamphetamine use didn't increase steeply, but there's a more diverse population that is consuming methamphetamine. The study suggests that the groups engaging in higher risk behavior, such as consuming the methamphetamine more frequently or co-consuming with other drugs. And this is what's leading to an increase in the number of overdoses associated with methamphetamine. Because historically, at least for the last several years, methamphetamine purity has been very consistent. It's very, very pure, in the high 90s% pure methamphetamine. So that hasn't changed. But it seems like this riskier behavior regarding the consumption as what's causing this increase in methamphetamine overdoses.
Interesting, thank you. So maybe we should talk a little bit more about China. Emily, would you like to keep going with that?
Sure. This is something Ray kind of alluded to last time he spoke. Historically, China served as a source for new psychoactive substances like synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones, or K2 and bath salts. This class included fentanyl-related compounds such as butyrylfentanyl or valorylfentanyl, along with many, many others. With the class scheduling of fentanyl-related compounds using the core molecular structure in both the United States and in China, we saw a significant decrease in the variety and number of seizures of fentanyl-related compounds. We have seen China shift from production of these fentanyl-related compounds to production of precursor chemicals, which are shipped to Mexico and made into fentanyl. And it's possible that as global pressure on China to regulate the production of these chemicals increases, that production could spread to other countries that have significant chemical industry already in place.
Thank you. Next, we should talk, or I would like to talk about what communities can do to protect themselves. Don, would you like to start with this one?
Right now, schools are a good location where you can learn more about drug awareness campaigns. The DEA and law enforcement offices in your communities as well. You also have a nationwide organization called Community Anti-Drug Coalition of America, CADCA, where online you can access all types of information and materials on how to teach and become aware of dangerous drugs and prohibitive items. So those are areas where you can learn about it. Parents can access that information as well. So there's a host of information in your communities where you can access this information and materials to become more aware of what's taking place in your communities.
Don, can you also speak to how are these primarily school kids getting these fake prescription pills, and how are we seeing that they are interacting with social media and different apps, not just in finding the pills, but paying for them and getting them to their houses?
So right now, it's estimated that those from the age of 13 to 27, 90% of those in that age group have access to online social media accounts, meaning that they have access in many ways to the world, or at least to those who are looking to sell harmful materials such as drugs. So they have access to a host of information, host of materials, anything that you can imagine. It's on social media. So these adolescents and children, all it takes is someone to send in a referral or a site or some type of an account of someone on social media where they can access all kinds of drugs. Okay, literally thousands of types of drugs that are out there, hosts of types of pills. You can imagine that online right now, and anyone can really look into it and actually seek it and find it. It's there. So once these individuals or these adolescents are inquiring about, say, a drug that could reduce their anxiety, such as Xanax pills and so forth, if someone's advertising it, they could advertise it using some type of a fake code word or an emoji, where these emojis are now being used to communicate and allow people at that age group, or anyone really for that matter, to look for certain types of drugs. These emojis also reveal how to communicate, the conveyance of which these drugs are going to be delivered. So these emojis, certain key slang words are all being used. And in many ways, we're looking to to constantly stay abreast of these code words, these emojis, because they're constantly changing. So that's why these adolescents are able to identify who's selling what type of a brand or drug or so forth. Now that there's certain types of a crackdown taking place on drugs or certain photos of drugs, they're using QR codes where someone could just use a QR code from their phone and actually pop up like in a menu. You go to a restaurant, use your smartphone to tap in a QR code. You see a menu. Well, they're doing the same thing now on social media, and they're sending these QR codes to children or adolescents through social media now, where the content moderators may not see what's on there, but those who actually are accessing the QR codes could see a menu and a hodgepodge of all kinds of drugs being sold.
Wow. And Don, do you have any advice for what parents should be looking for what their kids have on their phones, or what kind of interactions they're having on their phones?
Sure. First and foremost is what type of communication app are they using? Is it some type of a secure app? Is it an encrypted app? Okay, how many different apps are there? Well, just about every social media is a communication app, right? You can communicate however which way. And then also look for what we call these e-commerce types apps, okay? What type of e-commerce apps are there as well? Food delivery apps, and of course, payment apps, okay? These payment apps that are now available anywhere for anyone, these peer-to-peer apps where you can send funds directly to somebody else. But then the parents need to know, are their children's payment apps tethered to a bank account, or say a prepaid gift card that has a certain amount of money in there? So parents should be monitoring how the children are spending their monies, okay? Look at their children's contacts, see who they're communicating with. And of course, depending upon how old they are and whether or not their children will contest to whether the parents are looking at their text messages, I think it's incumbent upon the parent to be aware of what type of apps they are using and what's being delivered to your home in your mailbox. Who's delivering your home in your mailbox? Who's delivering your food deliveries? Okay, is it somebody that is actually one of those food delivery carriers? Is it food, but with also pills being delivered in that food bag as well? So there's a host of areas where parents need to be aware, and of course, it all starts on that smartphone.
Thank you so much. I will pose this next question a little differently to each of you. The question is, what do you think needs to change to mitigate the crisis? Ray, let's begin with you. Can you speak on an international level to what needs to change?
Sure. So I look at this problem on three prongs. So the first thing is a matter of policy, right? So when I look at chemicals coming into the Western Hemisphere, and particularly into Central America and Mexico, I would look for the United Nations, and in particular the INCB, to put more regulations on precursor chemicals, which I'm aware they are moving towards that. That will certainly slow down the production of fentanyl in Mexico, and it will make it a lot more challenging for these cartels to then develop the fentanyl. That's the first thing. The second thing is really to attack the supply. We can't let up and going after these criminal networks that want nothing more than to victimize our American citizens and to generate hundreds of millions of dollars off of them. And so we have to continue to pursue them and to bring them to justice, doing that in conjunction with our partners in Mexico and worldwide. Finally, it is to identify the demand and the opportunities to educate the public. And so that means we have to become more aware of the dangers that are behind fentanyl distribution. And so that is one of the big things that I think we as a nation could do, and a program like this is doing. So it's going after the education, treatment, and prevention as well. So it's a three-pronged approach that I think will really mitigate the fentanyl crisis that we see in the United States and abroad.
Thank you. Don, can you please speak on a national level about what needs to change?
Well, this entire illicit drug supply chain, in many ways, is piggybacking upon the legitimate commerce industry and banking. And as a result, it's not just a responsibility for our communities and law enforcement, but our so-called political leaders. It's also for our judicial system, the judges and the prosecutors as well. They need to kind of understand what the impact really is in their communities. Okay, there are attended and unintended consequences, unfortunately, that takes place on certain types of decisions being made, as well as, of course, the private sector and industries. These industries also have to be aware, especially the big tech firms, where now that you've got a whole new world market out there, but with lagging oversight, policing, and regulation. Until the government starts to regulate these social media companies, these big tech firms have to regulate and police themselves. Look for what is more harmful versus what is not harmful. They have to invest more in terms of their content moderation and decide, what costs will it incur to increase such, increase campaign and awareness, within their own corporations and companies, all the way up to the CEO. Okay. Also, these big tech companies need to start talking to one another as well. I know they're individual competitors, but these social media companies need to be aware of what harmful organizations and materials are being posted on their platforms. And just like banking institutions, they're regulated and they have a platform for which they could submit suspicious activity reports. Now, until these big tech social media companies have such a platform and oversight, they really need to really crack down on what's being used, what's being displayed over their platforms, and so forth. And they need to talk to one another as well and share those ideas. Okay, these big tech social media companies need to start working together to prevent these harmful materials from being accessed by the adolescents and society overall. So in many ways, it's a whole streamline of industries and networks and organizations and overall society that really needs to pay attention to this and do more about it.
Thank you. And Emily, can you please speak on a community level about what needs to change to mitigate the crisis?
I think really education programs based in scientific fact are really the way to go, particularly for children. It's critical in preparing them for the inevitable moment, because it is inevitable, that they're going to be exposed to drug use or drugs available for sale online. So educating them, having a discussion with them is really, really important. And given the role in social media and technology in the procurement of drugs, parents and caregivers really need to be incredibly diligent in monitoring what their kids are doing online. I also think it's really important for funding and access to treatment facilities, and just having that available for people that would like to seek assistance. I think that's really crucial.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. Before we move into the audience question and answer portion of our program, do any of you have final thoughts you would like to share with the American public about fake pills and fentanyl?
I would, Josh. The first thing I would say is this. You have 100,000 Americans dying each year from drug overdoses, right? This threat is not something that's going away. And as a parent myself, I want my kids and all of our kids to be aware of the dangers that are surrounding this threat. And Don mentioned it earlier. Here's what I see within drug distribution today compared to 10 or 15 years ago. They're accessing your houses, they're getting into your homes via social media. And to me, that is the biggest threat. No longer if someone has an addiction where they would have to go down a dark alley and meet up with a drug dealer. Now the drugs can be delivered to their doorstep. And so that threat is a growing threat because of technology and access. And so I would want every American, every parent, everyone to be on guard, to be aware of the dangers that are around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have one. In many ways, as previously mentioned, you have a stigma attached to drug use and drug abuse and so forth. But I think it's gone beyond that now. In many ways, it's a poisoning of children, thinking that they're looking for a medicine. Okay, and therein lies that dilemma, this gray area. Is it a medicine or is it a drug? So parents need to be aware, children need to be aware, but so do our lawmakers, our politicians, our regulators. They need to be aware of what's taking place and how we can protect our communities and society much better. And whether that means we have to increase our diplomacy overseas to help improve regulations and oversights on certain types of industries and companies, okay, that are lagging behind when their economies are accelerating. As usual, regulations and oversight and rules and laws are always lagging behind. And there has to be an accountability. There has to be some type of a repercussion, okay, and transparency as to what they're selling, how they're selling it, and to whom they're selling it. So unless you have the entire ecosystem that has to be, I don't want to say constantly regulated, but at least they need to be aware of what's taking place over their platforms, on their social media sites or their company websites, what they're selling to other countries and nations. There has to be a responsibility to whom they're selling. And if we can increase certain diplomatic measures overseas, whether it's in China, okay, to help regulate some of these, chemical pharmaceutical companies that are just wantonly selling these precursor chemicals to whomever's seeking it. They have to be a little bit more responsible and do a little bit more due diligence. Okay, there has to be a repercussion and accountability for those individuals who are selling these poisons to people without any foresight or whatsoever, just for greed. All right, those cartels in Mexico are doing this because, one, not only do they feel they're getting away with it, in many cases they are. So it has to be some type of repercussion. Okay, and those in the United States as well. Are they selling it because they're trying to help somebody, or selling it because of greed? And are they being held accountable? Or until somebody dies, they'll be held accountable. So in many ways, it goes across platform, in terms of who has to be aware of being responsible for their actions and what they sell and how they're selling it.
Thank you.
And I'll add just one comment, I guess, to kind of close us out. The opioid epidemic does affect Americans disproportionately when compared to the rest of the world. We really are kind of, unfortunately, the leaders in this area. Make sure you educate yourself and your loved ones, and don't be afraid to seek treatment if you need it. And know that all components of DEA, whether it's my colleagues here in Ops who are working on the street, us in the laboratory, or the folks working in a regulatory capacity, we're working tirelessly to curb the flow of fentanyl into our country.
Thank you so much. It is now time for the audience question and answer portion of our program. Our Visitor Services Coordinator, Liz, will be fielding the questions which have been coming into our museum email. If you have any questions, please do email them to deamuseum@dea.gov. Liz, have we gotten any questions?
We've gotten several excellent questions.
Excellent. So take it.
Our first question is asking if DEA is seeing any evidence of fentanyl being added to marijuana, vape pens, or gummies.
I can answer that. So we have seen some, not often, not many, but we have seen several occasions where fentanyl has been mixed with marijuana, in particular in the Northeast. But we do see fentanyl mixed with other illicit drugs such as cocaine and methamphetamine and heroin often.
And I will say from the lab side, again, yes, we have seen fentanyl with THC in samples. A lot of times, more often than not, it does appear that it's inadvertent contamination. It doesn't appear to be intentional. Usually it's very, very small amounts where maybe they used the same bowl or the same balance, to weigh out both fentanyl products and marijuana. So while it is occurring, and some of it may be intentional, we do also see samples where we do believe it's inadvertent or unintentional dosing of THC products with fentanyl.
Thank you.
Another question is very popular. A lot of people are asking, why are illegal drug producers continuing to distribute lethal doses of fentanyl that could kill their consumer base?
I'll answer that, Josh. So between the producers of fentanyl in Mexico to the actual street level distribution of drugs, there are many people or compartments of that drug from manufacturing to distribution. And so here's the reason. The vast majority of covert laboratories or fentanyl laboratories in Mexico, there are no chemists there. There is no quality control. There is no perfect mixing of chemicals to create a perfect pill. So we estimate that 42% of all the pills that we seize have enough of a dosage of fentanyl in it to kill someone and cause overdoses. And so what's driving that is ultimately greed. And so the cartels are going to continue to push fentanyl. They can care less about who dies. They're caring about the money that's coming back. That's what the intent is, to generate revenue.
Thank you. This question is from Ms. Lockhart. Is DEA tracking inactive ingredients or diluents identified in seized fentanyl pills?
So it is something we monitor in the laboratory, particularly in the fentanyl profiling program. And I am aware of some agencies that are looking more closely at this than maybe we are. I know we tend to kind of look at it from the science perspective about why would they be including certain substances in there? Why are we seeing caffeine used in there where fentanyl is a depressant, but we're seeing caffeine mixed in. Maybe what are some of the reasons that we're seeing that? Because that was one of the more prevalent adulterants we've seen this go around. So we're looking at it more from kind of the science perspective. I don't know if either of my ops folks can talk about any investigations or monitoring of that, from a higher level. But I am aware of some other federal agencies that are looking into that as well.
Thank you. How are these drugs still coming into the country, and what extra effort is being made to stop it?
So the drugs continue to come into the country from the southwest border. And so the effort that we as a whole of government and law enforcement are undertaking is to share information, share intelligence, collaborate across agencies, work with our counterparts, whether it's in CBP, Border Patrol, Homeland Security, FBI, and others, to really share the intelligence to go after these criminal networks. And I think that that's the key, to pursue these networks and not just individuals, to really take down the groups and the core groups that are the biggest fentanyl producers and traffickers. That's certainly DEA's role, and that's our goal, is to pursue them and bring them to justice. but along the southwest border is a primary means. And, some of the things that we can do as a nation to enhance that would be to enhance our technology and our ability to identify some of these, these groups and the methods that they deploy to smuggle fentanyl into the country, and also share intelligence. So, yeah.
Excellent. Someone asked, what is the difference between drug labs in Mexico and the types of labs DEA uses to test drugs?
Well, the simple answer is that the drug labs in Mexico are making drugs. We generally do not do that at our laboratory unless it's for research or something like that. And they're doing it at very, very large scale. So the equipment they have is huge. Quite frankly, it's enormous. Whereas here in the U.S., in forensic laboratories that are testing the drugs for the identity, we're focused more on characterizing the drug as opposed to synthesis of the drug. So we have equipment here that lets us test it and determine what's present in the sample. We do, of course, have some research capability where, particularly for our profiling or our signature programs, we have the capability to make small amounts of the drugs that we're interested in to aid us in our profiling capabilities. But I would say that's kind of the big one, is that we're really not focused on synthesizing drugs largely. We want to figure out what they are and how much is there, as opposed to actually making the material.
And the labs in Mexico are established or built to be clandestine. They want to stay hidden, covert. They did not want to be around the public. They're often up in the mountains or in the jungles, and they want to stay away from the general public. And so that's the purpose of the laboratories that are producing fentanyl in Mexico.
Thank you. Is anything being done on a federal level to help or require schools to teach about these current risks?
The only thing I'd say about that is that demand reduction is a big key to what DEA does, and we do that on a local level, so a field division level. We work very closely with the state, the city, and the actual communities to get the word out to our partners and to other state and local partners of the dangers of drug use. And so it's one of our missions is to do exactly that, but that's done very much on the local level. From a DEA corporate perspective, it's events like this that we push out to the public to also make them aware of the dangers. So it happens on both levels, both here, DEA headquarters, but also throughout the 23 field divisions across the United States.
Awesome. Do any of you see a value in providing fentanyl strips to test strips to high-risk populations?
I think allowing the end user to be informed about what they're consuming is important. We actually use the test strips here in the laboratory as well as a screening technique. They're very effective. So I think from an education standpoint, that's something we've been talking about a little bit, allowing the end user to educate themselves about, well, this sample actually does contain fentanyl. It's not a legitimate pharmaceutical product, or it's not just cocaine. It's actually cocaine with a little bit of fentanyl in it. I think it could be very useful, a useful tool, just allowing the user to know what's present in the sample that they're thinking about consuming.
Are there parental guards for kids' devices that parents can use to prevent the buying of counterfeit pills?
I'm not sure if there are, but there are certain apps over social media platforms for which parents could have a more oversight on. I'm not sure about exactly the pills itself, but there are certain apps where parents could use on their children's phones to look for certain types of activities, restrict certain types of products. But I'm not sure about pills itself. I know that there are numerous apps right now that parents can look for that will allow them to monitor what's taking place over their children's social media.
I'm sure a lot of people will find that very helpful. We have another question similar to the previous lab question, is why are these pills a different risk than the pharmaceuticals being made in legitimate laboratories?
Well, I think largely it's the fact that in a legitimate pharmaceutical laboratory that's making pharmaceutical products, there's a lot more oversight. There's actual oversight that's occurring. They test the products through multiple stages. They're under very tight restrictions about what purity the tablet is supposed to be, and they're held to certain standards for their products. And the clandestine nature of the laboratories in Mexico, there is no oversight. They can make whatever they want, however much they want, with however much fentanyl they want in it, and nobody's telling them how they should be doing it. They may not even have proper mixing equipment to make sure that the powder mixture before they press it is mixed properly before it's compressed into tablets. So there really is no oversight there, and that's really the big difference.
Thank you very much. Could any of you talk about the social problems underlying the current drug use epidemic in this country?
Don, I think you touched on that earlier.
Yeah, so you have your population of those who are addicted to opioids, but then what's taken place over the past few years, past 2 years really, in many ways, have created a whole new market for opioids as well, due to the fact that these cartels and organizations have really exploited the pandemic by marketing and selling these drugs, and using that M30 pill as their primary market, all right, because they know that the M30 pill, as oxycodone, as an opioid pain medicine, and once you separate those hardcore users, and then you look at what's taken place the past 2 years, where this whole new market of adolescents have taken place because of those lockdowns of those individuals that were looking for some type of relief, all right, from anxiety or depression and so forth. All of a sudden now, these predators have really taken advantage of that, and now began to sell these new not these new drugs, but these new ways of accessing these markets through social media. And now all of a sudden you've got a whole new market of adolescents and youngsters who are now using these pills to find relief. And unfortunately, you're seeing a large number of these people who are dying because they don't know if it's a real thing or not. And these cartels and these other networks and cells that are selling this don't really care. And in many ways, everyone has a certain tolerance for these types of drugs, these certain types of fentanyl pills, and whether one could take 2 or 3 and still feel that high, or one person just taking it, all of a sudden, they die immediately. So there's no standard, okay? And unfortunately, it's not just isolated in the United States; it's expanding throughout the world. Canada also has a huge fentanyl opioid overdose rate as well, and you're seeing it in other major European countries as well. So unfortunately, social media, which has immediate, wide, fast access to a large population of the world, in many ways are exploited in that manner, and unfortunately, you're seeing a whole new set of a population now being addicted to these pills.
Thank you. I think that is all the questions that we have time for today. But thank you so much for answering our questions from our public viewers.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today for this educational program. In particular, Emily, Ray, and Dawn, we thank you for taking time out of your busy days to produce this program with us. I would also like to thank my colleagues on the DEA Museum staff, all of whom went out of their way to make today's program a success. Further, we would like to thank our WebEx team for helping us to put together the program. And finally, thank you to everyone in our audience for tuning in. In the near future, a recording of this program will be posted to our website at deamuseum.org in perpetuity. Follow us on Facebook and join our mailing list to be sure not to miss any of our new programs, social media posts, and exhibits. Stay tuned for a closing slide of resources. From all of us here at the DEA Museum and from the DEA family, best wishes for a safe and healthy rest of your day. Thank you.